She thought she won him until he started pulling away from her. At first, she believed everything had fallen into place exactly the way she wanted. He was present, responsive, and emotionally available. And in her mind, that meant she had secured his attention completely. She assumed his loyalty was settled, that his focus had shifted permanently, and that there was no need to question stability anymore. The earlier confidence she carried made her feel in control of the situation, as if the connection had reached a point where nothing could change it. But what she did not realize was that present is not the same as peace, and attention is not the same as emotional alignment. Just because someone is there does not mean they are fully invested in staying there with their heart. Over time, small changes began to appear, not dramatic or enough to cause immediate concern, but noticeable enough to shift the energy between him. His reply became shorter, his engagement less natural, and his emotional warmth no longer flow in the same way it once did. She interpreted it at first as temporary distraction, assuming it will pass and things will return to how they were. But instead of returning, the distance slowly grew into subtle ways. He stopped initiating conversation with the same energy. He stopped reacting to situations with the same emotional depth. Even his silence started to feel different, carrying weight instead of comfort. What once felt like stability began to feel like detachment, although she did not fully accept it yet. He, on the other hand, was beginning to see things more clearly. The excitement that once influenced his decision had faded, and in its place came reflection. He started noticing how certain emotional patterns repeated themselves, how conversations sometimes felt one sided, and how certain moments required him to shrink part of himself to maintain peace. None of this happened overnight. It built slowly through experience and emotion and observation. The more he reflected, the more he understood that winning attention is not the same as building a healthy emotional connection. He began to question whether what he was in was truly aligned with who he was becoming. The shift became more visible when he started prioritizing his own space again. He no longer rushed to respond. He no longer explained every pause or delay. He stopped overextending emotionally just to maintain balance. That change created confusion for her because it contradicted the version of the relationship she believed she had secured. She thought closeness meant permanence, but she was now experiencing distance without explanation, and that uncertainty forced her to confront something she had not prepared for: emotional withdrawal from someone she believed was already fully invested. As he pulled away, it was not done with anger or dramatic confrontation. It was quiet, controlled, and gradual. He was no longer feeding the dynamic that made him feel emotionally drained or misunderstood. Instead of reacting, he started observing. Instead of chasing clarity through a conversation, he began finding clarity through distance. That absence of reaction became more powerful than any argument could have been because it removed emotional access without requiring conflict. What she once interpreted as security slowly turned into uncertainty, and that uncertainty made her realize she was no longer in the same position she thought she had secured. She began to notice the difference in how she felt about the situation compared to how she behaved within it. While she still operated from expectation, he was now operating from awareness. That difference created imbalance she could no longer ignore. The energy she assumed was stable began to feel unpredictable. The responses she once took for granted now no longer guaranteed, and the emotional reassurance she relied on started to fade, not through words but through consistent absence of the same level of engagement. What made this situation more difficult for her was the lack of confrontation. There was no clear ending, no argument to point to, no single moment to blame. Instead, there was distance that grew naturally as he aligned his emotional priorities. The kind of withdrawal is often harder to accept because it forces reflection without closure. She was left trying to understand what when things change, why he had already mentally shifted long before anything became visible on the surface. He started valuing clarity over attachment. He no longer stayed in situations where emotional effort felt unbalanced or misunderstood. The more he stopped the more he stepped back, the more he understood what he actually needed from connection, respect, emotional stability, and consistency that does not require constant explanation. He was no longer driven by the need to maintain appearance or preserve something that no longer felt aligned. That internal shift created distance naturally, without force, without intentions to hurt, but as a result of self awareness. In time, what she thought was secured began to dissolve quietly, not through conflict, but through emotional discernment. She thought she had won his attention permanently, but what she did not realize was the attention is temporary when it is not supported by emotional fulfillment. The connection did not collapse in a single moment. It faded through gradual withdrawal until the balance she once believed she controlled no longer existed. And in that silence, the truth became clear. He was never fully gone, but he was no longer fully there either.